Welcome, everybody. This is our National Conversations presentation. Today we have Musa Kilinc joining us from Australia. So a warm welcome to you, Musa, for getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning or a bit before 6 o'clock to join us. And this is part of the National Conversations seminar series that CIFFC's Fire Science Committee is putting on. I'm not going to go through your bio. We've sent it out to everybody, and I'll just let you jump right in after you swallow down that glass sip of water to your talk, the pyroconvective hazards. And again, just emphasizing if people have questions, put them into the chat, and welcome Musa Kilinc.
Thanks for the introduction there, Heather. I've already had a couple of coffees, so hopefully I'm not yawning too much. And good afternoon, everybody, as well. Just gonna switch to the next slide. So, and I guess with this presentation here, my colleague Tim Wells, so he was unable to make it, so it will just be me presenting today. So just one person waking up really early. Just to start off the presentation and just to give you a flavour of what it's about, and it's really just about some of the challenges that both Tim and myself had in putting together a what we call a seasonal focus pack in Victoria. So it was really about trying to educate our firefighters in Victoria about high risk pyrocumulonimbus type events and some of the conditions that sort of leads up to the 1920 Black Summer bushfire season that we had. So I'll just provide by giving some context around Victoria, where it's located, why it's important, then talk a little bit about the plume-dominated fires and some of the risk factors and consequences behind them. And then talk a little bit about the pre-seasonal package that we developed with a wide range of people within the organisation and outside the organisation as well, and then just wrap it up by going through some of the key learnings that we did get from this little project. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to Australia before. Kelsey's probably in the room somewhere, so she's definitely been to Australia, down to Victoria, Melbourne. And I guess, you know, from our perspective and just the way in which southeast Australia is located, it is one of the most fire-prone areas of the world. And I'll just throw some statistics your way to keep you all interested. So Victoria is roughly 22.7 million hectares. And during Black Summer, roughly 1.5 million or 6.6% of the state burnt. And on average, any given year, we usually get about 250 odd thousand hectares, which is about 1% of the land area, and that burns due to wildfires. And, you know, if you're also quite keen to jump onto Wikipedia as well, so historically Victoria, along with southeast Australia, has had many destructive bushfires in the past. So some of these events include the Red Tuesday event from 1898, Black Friday from 1939, Ash Wednesday, Black Saturday, the Alpine Great Divide fires, and then Black Summer more recently. And with the infographic there that you can see on the left part of your screen, you know, the size of the circles effectively just represent how destructive some of these fires have been. So the really big circles here represent fires that have destroyed roughly 2,000 houses, and the smaller circles sort of gradually decrease in destructive nature. So the important part here is that the frequency of these events have been increasing. So that's something important and that we're all aware about. And no doubt that's, other parts of the world are experiencing something similar. Many of these events historically have also been associated with fatalities, be it community or firefighters. They do have very large fire extents and often associated with plume-dominated fire behaviour or an extreme form of fire behaviour that we don't know how to categorise just yet. And I guess something that we'll try to talk about throughout this discussion here is when referring to a plume-dominated fire or plume-dominated fire behaviour. I guess what we're trying to really refer to here is Pyrocumulonimbus, which is the long form of PyroCB. So I'll probably stick with PyroCB because it's easier and it rolls off the tongue easier. Or some people might call it a fire-induced thunderstorm, or some people also call it a three-dimensional fire. So basically trying to refer to the same thing here, and that was one of the challenges that we did have with trying to describe these type of events. So if I just this next one, here we go. And what we see on the right here is just some work done by one of the researchers, Jason Sharples, shortly after the 1920 fire season, which is a graph here showing the cumulative increase of PyroCB type events in southeastern Australia. And as again, you can sort of see it's all increasing, it's all upward trajectory. And one of the reasons we sort of got onto this topic and try to make it a bit more of a focus point for CFA, for the Country Fire Authority, and for our firefighters was the amount of PyroCB type events that we did get during the 18-19 season. So that was sort of a pretty dry year, getting to that drought period. And as you can sort of see in the diagram, we did have quite a bit of an uptick during that 18-19 season in PyroCB events. And then the following year, 1920, which is the one at the end, you can see this really large increase where there's effectively a 30-point increase in the unconfirmed PyroCB type events. And I think it's about 15 or so in the confirmed events. So it's a really big uptick, and that's how dry and how big that season was for us in Victoria. I've just got some anecdotes that I've put up on the screen. So while we were trying to prepare for this seasonal focus package, we spoke to a lot of people, firefighters, fire managers, just trying to get a vibe of what people thought about PyroCB events and extreme fire behaviour and what sort of came to their minds. And people really like to tell their stories. And that's a really good thing. But as part of our jobs as fire behaviour analysts in Victoria and CFA, it's really about trying to get a sense of what and how people interpret what they're seeing. So, you've got words like crazy, and that the fire will go crazy. But what does crazy mean? And you'll often, hear firefighters talk about plume collapse. And I guess the question for us is, is that an accurate account? Did that really happen? Because quite often firefighters and probably other, positions as well in the workforce, do tell accounts, but it's about, did that actually occur, or is there a mismatch in terms of what they're trying to communicate, or are they not sure about their observations, so they're trying to give an account or a story of what they think they saw or what they experienced. So it just becomes really difficult to verify some of these events when talking to firefighters. And then I guess on the other hand, when we are talking about the scientific literature. So, you know, the whole PyroCB work, you know, began in the 1940s, 1950s with George Byram. Then we had Alan MacArthur, Rothermel, Countryman, and now there's a whole heap more people. You know, a lot of scientists working on this problem, trying to explain the science behind it. And there has been, you know, that awareness over time. And in Victoria, I guess probably one of the defining reports, and this would be in the grey literature, was by a report by Kevin Tolhurst. So he's like our fire guru. He's recently retired, but he sort of did this report back in 1995. Oh, sorry, the event was back in 1995. The report came out a few years later, but it was effectively looking at a Baringa fire in which the fire was plume driven, and a PyroCB did establish over that fire. And because it's Kevin Tolhurst, because he's sort of the guru, a lot of firefighters read what he's written down and go to his presentations because he's very knowledgeable, and he's easy to talk to, and he really explains complex problems into something firefighters can understand. So Victorian firefighters will generally refer to these type of documents like Kevin as an instigator of this sort of plume-driven or plume-dominated bushfires. And I guess maybe one of the important things about this report was the way in which the outcomes from this work started to filter into training, into firefighter training concepts, and firefighter safety. So I guess one of the recommendations by Kevin was to put out an observer as part of the incident management team to monitor the convective development of plume-driven fires, and then to alert firefighters about the condition or if there was an imminent downburst. The report did come out in February 1999, so unfortunately that sort of coincided, well, I think it was like 3 months after the Linton tragedy in which 5 volunteer firefighters died due to a wind change event. So this document by Kevin was really important because it was, you know, first started learning firefighters about these type of events, but at the same time there was a really, you know, important fire which resulted in the loss of life, and there was an inquiry and an inquest about that Linton event, which you know led to a whole heap of organisational change, operating procedures in the Country Fire Authority related to the dead man zone. So because Linton was probably more important at the time, the work done by Kevin and some of the recommendations probably did not filter through into all the training packages at the time, just because Linton was probably more important. On the screen, I've just got a few photos here. Just quickly, you know, we've got our terrain-driven or wind-driven fires here on the left. We've got some sort of transition into a pyrocumulus stage, and then fully plume-dominated or driven fire on the right of the screen. And you know, it's and I guess when we sort of think about how dangerous these fires are, and how they transition, you know, you can't get a plume-driven fire unless you get a pyrocumulus transition, and then you can't ever get that unless you actually get a terrain wind-driven fire to start off with in the first place. And I guess, you know, one of the most important things about all this is that each of these fires are really important, and each of them are really dangerous, just depending on where you're sort of standing in respect to these fires. So I guess, you know, when we do talk about pyrocumulus, you know, we are thinking about the cotton ball look or the texture of that fluff on top of that top of that smoke plume there. But they're really common events, you know, during planned burns and even in forest or stubble type burns. You do often get pyrocumulus fluff. Sorry, not pyrocumulus occurring on top of the smoke plumes. And it's not, you know, something necessarily to be concerned about. It's just there due to the physics and the science of that interaction with the atmosphere. But as you're probably all aware, once these pyrocumulus type events grow in size and intensity, they then can become a lot more active and then become plume driven. And that's usually associated with, you know, really dry litter beds when the landscape is dry, in steep terrain or rugged terrain, when there's atmospheric instability and triggers as well, which may be a cold front or a sea breeze, which really allows these type of events to rapidly escalate. The consequences of these type of events is probably, again, all aware. There's typically an increase in fire behaviour through fire line intensity, increase in spotting, changes in wind direction, spread, as well as spotting, again, potential downbursts, and lightning. And I guess, you know, as I was sort of saying earlier, like, I mean, each one of these fires are dangerous in their own right. But, you know, for a plume-driven or pyro-CB type event, there are scientific criteria for classification, which is really good to see. You know, for pyro-CB events, cloud top temperatures have to be less than -40 degrees. The presence of lightning is a strong indicator for pyro-CB classification. But these scientific descriptions are really related to, or the physical definitions are really related to aerosol spreading through the stratosphere. So these classifications were, you know, made by scientists looking at aerosol spreading in the lower stratosphere, and not so much about you know, fire scientists, if you will. And again, like, you know, when we are talking about or thinking about crews on the fire line or community in the path of wildfire, it's more about, is this fire going to impact us, and is this fire dangerous or not, rather than any given classification. So there's probably lots of you know, fires that don't, oh sorry, the fires that have occurred, but doesn't meet this really strict criteria. And I'll give an example of that a little bit later in the presentation. But I guess, you know, from a lot of people's view, it's more about, is this fire erratic, and is this fire going to cause damage to us? And then what's, you know, also important in all this is about messaging the potential of these type of events. So it's not about if this event has occurred or not, but what's the potential if it does occur. But at the same time, we don't really know too much about these type of events. Like, certainly before, you know, 1920 fire season, we didn't know a lot about it. We still don't know a lot about it, but we know a little bit more. And yeah, so that's something really important to think about. And yeah, just not related to plume-dominated fires, but, you know, a whole heap of other stuff as well. And so I guess, you know, from our point of view, the important part was, you know, getting to that 19 fire season. The outlook from the forecast point of view about dryness and temperatures was that it was going to be a protracted drought period with not much rainfall. It's all doom and gloom type of thing. And I guess, from early on, we probably recognised that it would be a significant fire season in Victoria and along southeast Australia as well. And this was sort of communicated up through our chain, and we were then asked to develop some material for our pre-season training packages. So that usually is provided or delivered in that spring period between September and November. So I guess, we'd raise all these issues well before then, so it could be recognised and put into practice per se in terms of trying to deliver content to our firefighters. The important part about the seasonal focus and that is provided to our firefighters across CFA is that it's a really big package. It's just not a few pages. It's a big document that's also got other messaging from our chief and our senior fire management as well. And I guess just to give you a flavour of some of the other content in this seasonal focus package was things like around avoiding injuries when getting in and out of trucks, reminders about aviation hazards, so some of the safety things that people need to do when aircraft are hovering around and dropping water, and all the things that go along with that. Information about managing crew fatigue, information about hydration. So there's some really important but simple things in there as well that that crews always need to be reminded of. Because it's those really simple things that people forget and then they hurt themselves. So constant reminders seem to help. But I guess we were sort of tasked to provide something really complex in the midst of all this really simple messaging, but really important messaging as well. So and I guess what we sort of want to ensure in all this is to make sure that our material was brief, to the point, so that the messaging can be delivered concisely. So we work with our lessons management centre at CFA. We work with the Bureau of Meteorology, as well as staff within the agencies as well, to try to come up with something that was factually accurate and was presented in a way that many firefighters could understand, interpret, and understand, free of jargon, what we were trying to communicate. One of our lessons management staff was all over it. She's like, you can't just do a fact sheet. So she got on us onto a whole heap of other media type of stuff as well. So for the Brigade magazine, in fact sheets as part of the seasonal focus package, the seasonal focus magazine, and then some videos, and then some PowerPoint type slides for district briefings as well. So there was a whole heap of different media streams that we did go through our interactions within CFA. And so, there's effectively a whole heap of different media forms that we had to communicate through. And one of our first challenges was really around the terminology of what we actually use. So during the presentation, you probably heard me say plume fire, plume dominated, convective. Is there a right way to communicate this, and is any single term better or more effective than others? So we really struggled with going, well, should we call it smoke plume, plume dominated, smoke column, convective fire behavior, plume driven, plume dominated. And the question was, do firefighters even know the difference between all these different terminologies? And I guess talking to a range of people, there was really no universal agreement. I think from memory, the Bureau of Meteorology probably had the strongest opinion on this, and they weren't really too fussed either at the time, just because there was really no agreement jurisdictionally or even within Victoria to go, what is the right terminology? So at the end, we just decided to use plume-dominated bushfires just to keep it consistent and the language simple. But we're not even sure if we did that part right in terms of keeping the terminology consistent throughout all these different media type that was delivered. Some of the, as I was sort of just saying, the one of the challenges was about the terminology, and also deciding how much information to include for the message to be understood. Typically, if you keep the message short and simple, then it does seem to work a bit better. But we also really struggled with the fact that plume-dominated fire behavior is really complex, and then if you simplify the message too much, does it lose meaning and relevance? And we weren't quite sure about this, so we really stumbled our way through this whole package effectively. And just trying to keep it simple, and just trying to keep it relying on old firefighter training manuals, not introducing anything too flash, definitely not introducing a whole heap of new terminology, because most likely firefighters aren't going to really understand that. We didn't want to introduce new procedures or even go down that path. So again, just really relying on the existing processes and procedures. And the whole reason for that is just not to confuse everybody. And I was as I was sort of saying earlier, plume-dominated fires is just one of the many hazards on the fire line that firefighters have to deal with. And what was really difficult for us was just trying to keep that balance, because firefighters at the fire line have to deal with a whole heap of hazards. So again, we weren't quite sure if this was an important one compared to all the other hazards out there. So we didn't want to overstate or understate the significance of this, or of this, plume-dominated fire behaviour. And we don't even have an objective measure of how important the other hazards are as well. So like, if as I was sort of saying earlier, like, I mean, it's about people getting on and off trucks, which is a pretty big trip hazard, right? But how important is that compared to all the other hazards? We don't know. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know. So we're just trying to, keep all this stuff really simple. We don't even have full scientific understanding of what plume-dominated fires are or how they fully develop. There's a lot of stuff out there, but again, just trying to keep it simple and concise where we could. The quote on the screen is from a really experienced operations officer from our forestry area in Victoria. So they keep changing their names. Used to be DSE, DELP. Now they're called DECA. But there's some really good and experienced firefighters in that area, in that group. So we thought this was a really important quote for us, and it became, yeah, and it sort of came out during discussion with him about for this presentation a while ago, and about trying to work at the fire line and look after the crews, especially during a plume-dominated fire. And this particular operations officer thinks that crews seem to remember messages or behaviours that they are repeatedly exposed to. But then the question is, how do you get repeated exposure to a fairly infrequent event? As you probably saw earlier from that chart there, it was only during the 1819 and 1925 seasons that we did have a pretty big uptick in these type of events. Before that, it was relatively quiet and moderate. The other important thing about this particular operations officer was that he gave a really good account of a situation where he was working as a sector commander with crews and under a plume-dominated fire. And his account was that his crews were constructing a control line in a paddock about 100 metres back from the forest boundary using 3 bulldozers and a grader. Whoops. Yep. And yeah. His resources were scattered over 5 kilometres in an area with unreliable radio communications. The fire was running rugged terrain parallel to the line his crews were constructing. The fire was about 1 kilometre into the forest, and the crews were working in a valley with a wide, shallow river. The winds were only moderately strong, but the fire was running hard, presumably convection driven. He was concerned that if the column broke down, the fire might turn and run sideways towards his machines. So he briefed all the operators and told them if any of the following occurred: 1, the wind dropped; 2, they started getting any spots of rain; 3, they started getting spot fires landing around them. And they were not to ask any questions or waste time on the radio, but just head straight for the river, drive their machines into it and sit out until advised otherwise. So this particular operations officer, I wish I could just name him. Everyone, some of you may already know him, but it just feels a bit particular calling him operations officer. But you know, his sort of views on this isn't too uncommon amongst the really experienced operations officers or firefighters. So it's basically, whoops, yeah. So it's basically if you do, sorry, yeah. So if you do lots of work in a particular environment, you keep learning the important stuff that you need to focus on. And again, we don't know if this is true or not, especially in relation to plume-dominated fires. And when we do have infrequent events like this, again, what's the best way of learning as a firefighter on the fire ground? So yeah, so this particular guy, he was of the opinion that repeated exposure was a good way of understanding it. Now I'll just talk a little bit about the some of the challenges in forecasting these type of events. So I guess fortunately for us in Victoria, we've got a few scientists that are starting to specialise in this area, and one of those people are Kevin Torrey from the Bureau of Meteorology. So he's a Pyro CB researcher. working directly in Victoria. So he's been working with fire agencies all across Australia over the last 4 or 5 years, if not longer, about trying to help fire agencies predict and forecast these type of events by creating a diagnostic type tool that tries to pick up these type of events. So that's what the figures on the left try to illustrate. The coloured image of southeast Victoria there is basically some of the model outputs, and then some of the photos on a little bit on the right there for the Sir Ivan and then the Lucola fires, plume-driven or plume-dominated fires that did occur, and it's really about trying to understand when the modeling works and when it doesn't. So trying to discern some of the factors that determine model performance, and it's really trying to get some level of confidence in the modeling as well. So luckily enough for us, like Kevin did spend quite a lot of time with us in our control centres, trying to educate us about how to interpret the model, and allowing us to ask him lots of questions about the model and try to understand the science behind it as well. But I guess having read in some of his work and work directly alongside him, the modelling does have good alignment with Pyro-CB events that did occur, which was really good to see. But on the other end of the spectrum, the modelling didn't always work. And again, it was really difficult to understand if that was the forecast error, the model error, or a combination of both, or other factors included. So, but either way, it was really good to work alongside Kevin Torrey, and it's really difficult, without direct observations as well. So in Australia, Victoria, we just tend to do the 11 a.m. And 11 p.m. aerological soundings, and there typically isn't a balloon release in the afternoon. So when analysing, going back to these events, it's reliant on forecast data rather than observational data of the atmospheric environment or the weather itself as well. In Victoria, I guess over the last 4 or 5 years as well, we have been exploring our own sort of capabilities and doing a little bit of internal research to understand what we can do as well in terms of that observational space. So we are exploring, or have been exploring, options to release little balloons, not the big giant helium filled ones that the Bureau would release, but little small ones, especially during planned burn or bushfire events. So the New South Wales, so that's the jurisdiction that also experienced massive fires during 1920 season. So they sort of introduced that capability quite a while ago and have found it to be quite useful, especially during some of the major events that they've had in the past as well, for the Sir Ivan fire that you can sort of see on the photo there, as well as during the 1925 season as well. And again, it's about trying to understand when these events may occur through observations and forecast. So in Victoria and Australia, there is quite a lot of regulation around the launching of the big helium-filled balloons, and hence why we sort of opted for the small balloons, because we don't need to go for all the regulation and processes to release small helium-filled balloons. It's got some other issues associated with it, but it seemed like again a good option to trial. At least as a research perspective. In terms of again, like the whole purpose of what we're trying to do here, with modelling and balloon releases, it's about to go, can we predict these Pyro-CB type events? And as I was sort of saying earlier in the presentation, the question is really about, is it important that it's a Pyro-CB event or not? Or is it more important that it is a fire that has potential to cause damage and fatalities and all that other sort of stuff that goes along with it? So I guess as an example, during 1925 season, one of our biggest fires wasn't Pyro-CB class fire. It was Upper Murray 26, or short form UM26, which effectively travelled about 90 kilometres in less than 24-hour period. And that was during the day and at night time, but it was never classified as a Pyro-CB event by the Bureau or the researchers, but it was a really destructive fire. It was associated with fatalities, large fire area, but not classified as a Pyro-CB. So it sort of raised the question again in terms of, what is important in terms of trying to communicate these type of events. The photo on the right here, that's, I don't know if you've heard about him. So Nick McCarthy, a researcher now embedded in CFA. So he used to do quite a lot of work with radars and trying to detect radar signatures in plumes. And again, like, monitoring large convection plumes or plume-dominated fires using radar or other technology really gives a really first-hand experience and an account of what these fires may do, and has been used in fire operations in the past, where it has helped fire managers to make some decisions around, do we need to pull crews off the fire line or not? And I guess there's always uncertainty involved with any of this, and the research has been insightful, really important, and again sort of raised the question about some of the decisions made. Was that a good decision, or was it by luck that some of the information provided and used, the fact that it may or may not have eventuated? So it has been useful in the form of trying to make educated guesses and then using that to communicate to the fire managers about some of the potential of these Pyro-CB or plume-dominated fires in real life. But obviously a lot more work needs to be done to better understand these, the right infrastructure, the right the right governance and the right amount of people within the agencies that understand these type of events. This is the final slide and the concluding slide. I guess, as you probably would have figured out from me waffling on here, is that we found it really difficult to gauge how effective we were at communicating our message for the seasonal focus pack as part of that pre-seasonal fire awareness campaign that was initiated in CFA. We also don't know if any firefighters actually took note of what we said, or how many, sorry, took note of what we sort of delivered, or if they took any actions afterwards to sort of decrease the risk of exposure to these type of events. I guess, from talking to firefighters and fire managers over the last few years, is that one of the things that we have noticed is that there's a lot more, and we don't know if this is directly associated with what we did, but probably not. But I guess one of the things that we have noticed is that a lot more people are taking photos, videos, and sharing them. There's a lot more engagement with air attack supervisors and air observers as well, where we are, constantly engaging them probably a lot more freely than we have in the past about the photos that they can take and send through to us, the fire behaviour desk, where we have been, talking about, well, take photos as you're sort of approaching the fire, so we can actually see the plume. So a lot of the photos that we are getting back now, even for really small fires, is photos of the plume when they're still 10 kilometers away, 20 kilometers away, and that's the first thing that they see. They take a photo, they send that through, and that's been really useful, invaluable in some cases, just trying to get our heads around what that potential of that fire may be. Over the last 3 seasons, over the last 3 seasons, we have been in La Nina, so and it has been really wet in Victoria. So there hasn't really been a lot more opportunity to, I guess, get further exposure to these type of events. But if we just keep communicating the importance of these plumes and the sharing of photos or videos, communications, it has been really important for us. There has been some growing interest as well from the research community. Again, that's not really related to us, but when researchers from the Bureau of Meteorology, universities are doing work on this type of area, it's leading to advances in terms of the learning modules that we're creating, within the fire agencies, so that we can build further awareness and people at least get more of a scientific understanding of what these events are, how they developed, what things to look out for. And I think, working with, working directly with, researchers from the Bureau of Meteorology or universities, or whatever that may be, has just really been invaluable in terms of us learning and then being able to communicate that or some of the messages. One of the most important things that we've probably noticed over the last couple of years also has been the importance of the pre-season messaging. Like, pre-1920 season, there wasn't a lot of messaging focused on what the season may look like or what it may bring. And you'd only get like 5 minutes or 2 minutes, if that, at the chief's message. But now what we are observing is monthly or bi-monthly meetings or messaging by the chiefs about the season, or what that bushfire season may look like. And there's, I guess, further communication during the bushfire season as well, about, what that fire season actually holds. So I guess recently we have communicated, through our chief, some of the early indicators for 23-24 season now. And so some of that stuff's already been being disseminated, which has been really fantastic. From our limited feedback about the seasonal focus pack, and all the different media platforms that we sort of went through, the feedback we did get was that fact sheets were good. I know there's lots of community engagement people out there that absolutely hate fact sheets. And there's a whole heap of other ways to do this type of information, to provide this type of information out to different people. But we found that fact sheets worked good in our situation. It was well received. We found that, providing reports or scientific journal articles or scientific literature didn't tend to work as well. And again, that would have been due to the time limitation of firefighters, volunteer or staff. But yeah, in our case, we found that fact sheets worked. We don't know how well the media or the videos worked either. Didn't really get a lot of feedback on that. And in terms of our district briefings, we thought that was well received. So going out to different regions, to the different districts, and spending 5-10 minutes talking about some of these hazards with some of the district staff, that was well received, and they really appreciated what we had to offer. And I guess that some of the outcomes from that type of initiative was that some of the brigades were also interested as well. So we can go out to some of the brigades that do have the firefighters and to talk about these type of hazards, and again for them to ask questions directly about the science, about these type of events, and some of the learnings that we can get out of it. Again, really difficult for us just because we don't really fully understand or appreciate the science just yet. But yeah, we thought that was some of the important learnings in terms of future endeavours. Probably the most significant one was about collaborative research in terms of trying to understand these type of events or other events as well. So having researchers embedded or researchers working really closely with us or fire agencies, we found that to be really useful. And what we've probably also found is that there has been a lot of research, and just not on this type of stuff, but other stuff as well. But typically, when research is done in isolation and there isn't that engagement with the fire agencies, or we don't know about it, then that research doesn't seem to go too far or doesn't have the uptake. So that's a really good outcome, or learning outcome for us as well, as we sort of go for a whole lot of research, and we're doing research just not on Pyro-CB type events, but a whole heap of other stuff as well. So it's about sharing and working collaboratively with each other, and not trying to exclude researchers, but yeah, just ensuring that that we are communicating to a whole a group of researchers, so that we can sort of get the best out of all the research that has been done, and so we can take it into consideration and sort of get the importance of what that means, so we can again better tie that into our agency practices. And I guess, just to add further to that, so research is really important in our case, but just working collaboratively within the organisation as well. So, to do this seasonal focus package, we were working with our learning management team, who sort of specialise in lessons management. We were talking to our training teams. We were talking to our operations team, that are more directly linked with firefighters, working with our forecasters as well, and also the researchers as well. So it was a big collaborative effort. We don't fully probably understand or appreciate all the learnings that we got out of it, but definitely I think one of the take-home messages was to work more collaboratively, so we can actually achieve outcomes together, because as you're probably all aware, these fire problems are big problems, and no single person or organisation or agency will answer all the questions that come out of fire and all the problems and issues that result from it. Yeah, so if we work together, I think more achievable, and hopefully we can overcome some of these issues. And that's my last slide. Yeah, thanks heaps for listening. And now I'll throw it back to Heather.
Thanks a lot, Musa. Really appreciate that. It's talking about communicating kind of technical things to firefighters is a interesting side of things. We did get a question in the chat. Well, first of all, Kelsey is here. She says hi.
Hi, Kelsey.
And we did get a question in the chat from Aiden Powers. Are you able to detect pyro-CV with radar, satellite imagery, or other detection equipment? Or is this largely from observations, photos, and videos? They're curious about what defines a confirmed versus unconfirmed pyro-CV. And just a note, we only have a couple minutes now, so please brief.
Oh, look, I reckon probably the scientists are probably the best people to ask that question. I mean, they've got their own criteria for assessing these type of events, which I'm pretty sure doesn't rely on photos per se. I mean, that's just a validating factor, but yeah, through radar signatures is probably the best way. I think Kelsey might answer that one, or just a different question. I don't know, but yeah, I reckon the scientists have got the answer to that one, not me.
All right, Kelsey.
Hi, Musa. Nice to see you. I just had a quick question about the training material. That's where I'm living in my world now. You spent a bit of time trying to make that super complex scientific thing into something that was digestible by everybody. Do you have any tips for that, or can you share some of what you've done? I just feel like we could all benefit in our training programs from that. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm really happy to share what we produced in terms of the material, be it the fact sheets or videos. Might have to search a bit deep now. 3 years. The videos is probably locked somewhere down the bottom. But look, I don't know. Look, it's a really hard question. Sounds really simple, but it's a really hard one. Not sure is probably my best answer, and I think probably what we found is we spoke to a whole heap of people that had similar opinions, but also had diverse opinions as well. And I guess when we are dealing with a really broad, diverse group, I think sometimes we just need to potentially sit back a little bit and go, what's going to work for a certain group might not work for a different group. And I think that's probably one of the biggest outcomes, learnings that we got, is try to tailor messages for different groups. And we've got in Victoria, as you're probably aware, our forest firefighters and our CFA volunteer firefighters, which probably understand things differently, and so communicating and trying to provide content in a different way, I think is probably a good way to sort of approach it. So for our volunteers, I think what probably works best sometimes for anyone, group of them, is just some really clear messages, really simple stuff, things that they need to look out for, rather than getting into the really, the science or the specific details. I think that's what probably separates out the two fire agencies in Victoria. Again, I don't know if that's useful, but that's what we found maybe as something useful. But yeah, really hard question.
Oh, sorry, Musa. I thought that was a good one, but thanks. I think what you've given is awesome, and I look forward to maybe seeing some of your documents. That'd be great.
Thanks, Kathy.
All right, I don't see anybody else with their hand up. Musa, I really want to say that I really appreciate you getting up early in the morning. So very, very appreciative of you joining us from Australia and getting up early in the morning and working together with us. And I know that there's such really good research going on there. And I also wanted to just highlight like the CFA and the work that is happening with, having a couple researchers in the organization and how that's connecting more in terms of the knowledge exchange and mobilization and, translating knowledge. And you know, I think that you guys are doing a fantastic job there.
Thanks, Heather. Very kind of you.
I'm just trying to broadcast it across to everybody, you know, like, so Sarah gave a great talk at the Wildland Fire Canada conference, just about like, you know, what the model's looking like at the CFA, with a couple more researchers on board, and you know, like how that's really improving the synergies. And I will say, if you want to shoot a couple documents to me, I'm happy to kind of send out a couple PDFs to people that joined us today if they want to see those actual documents. Like that's one of those things that would probably be beneficial, to have that connection between the talk and like what your seasonal outlook looked like and stuff. You know, happy to email that. And I really want to say, oh, there we go. Thanks, Musa and Heather. I would love to access those documents. So I'm pretty sure that people would probably be happy if you're willing to share them, and I can send them through. And oh, another couple going like, yes, please. So thank you very much for presenting today. I'm just going to stop the recording here.